Okay, Chuck, are you ready? We only have one shot. We got to make this work.
Wait, you didn't give me...
Just read your lines. I'll give you the paper. Okay. Psst, are you guys ready? Are you ready? All right. Are you ready to deconstruct with friends?
What the hell? Where did all this come from?
Deconstructing your faith used to be lonely
got a band?
and boring as hell.
Wait.
But no one must deconstruct their faith alone ever again when you deconstruct with friends. Chuck, tell them what we mean.
Yeah,
Go.
that's right, Brady.
Yeah.
The Life After has a... what the hell, Brady?
I went full-on Jumanji on this one, but keep going. He's a rental by the hour.
The Life After podcast has a secret Facebook community and Slack channel for people deconstructing the Christian fundamentalism and other oppressive religions. Meet new people
And
deconstruct with friends.
Nice job, Chuck. You even got the echo.
Thanks. That was kind of cool, I guess. Oh God, he's touching me with his trunk.
You can apply for the secret group.
It's wet.
On our Facebook by answering 3 entrance questions. Your membership is hidden, and the admins keep the room constructive and helpful.
Now, can we get this elephant out of here?
Nope, probably not. But we can.
Deconstruct with friends.
We don't need no Jesus or God. We've got our own miracles.
We don't need none
here.
of that. We don't need none of that.
Welcome to the Life After. This is Brady Harden.
And I'm Chuck Parson. And Brady.
Yeah, what's up, Chuck?
So I was listening to an episode of This American Life recently, which, on our first segment today, we'll be discussing the trappings of trauma. And that was my hourglass. Did you not?
No, I was letting you go. I was letting you riff, and it was proving to be just as boring as I thought it would be.
You just looked at me like...
well, I was waiting because I don't think there's any Muppets that jump in on This American Life.
Start talking to little kids about something that they don't understand, but they're being polite. That was the face you were just giving me.
I'll be honest with you, that's my permanent face. I have resting whatever face that is.
Resting confused child face. Polite confused child face.
No, but what were you saying? I'm following.
So they brought up something that I hadn't thought about in a while, which is sort of often discussed in the processing of PTSD, or in our particular case, religious trauma syndrome. Something that's called a stuck point.
Okay.
Which I think the more complex your trauma is, probably the more stuck points you have. But say that you were you're processing your trauma. You were recently in a car accident, right? It's like you were psychologically traumatized by a car accident.
Okay.
And you might think a stuck point for you is basically something that you hold to be true, something that you believe is true, that is not necessarily true, or is just straight up not true at all.
So give me an example in that car
Yeah,
accident.
so in the car accident, it would be if I hadn't turned around before I got in the car to go get my banana that I forgot, the timing would have all been different and I wouldn't have gotten in a car accident, right?
So it's kind of like your brain's way of reverse moth. What do you call that? Where you've got the moth that goes back in time.
The butterfly effect.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. The moth effect.
The
Mothman effect. The Mothman prophecy effect.
Yeah, right.
No, the butterfly effect. So it's kind of like your brain's way of butterfly in effect.
Yeah.
Some sort of meaning that puts blame onto
you, or it says circumstances,
you're the only variable that you can fix.
Usually, you're right. Yeah. It's usually something that is there's no way for you to know whether that has anything to do with anything.
Because time and knowledge was also a variable.
Right. Or if if you're a rape victim, you might say, oh, well, if I hadn't walked down this street by myself, or if I hadn't stayed at work late, it's sort of a way to blame yourself, or it's a way to apply some kind of blame to something that doesn't necessarily. The point is that it keeps you from being able to process the trauma properly in a healthful way, because you're stuck. It's called a stuck point, right?
You're making that loop, right?
Yeah, you're just running a loop of like, if I hadn't, if it hadn't, if this person hadn't, instead of just like accepting and desensitizing, which is what you really need to be doing.
That makes sense. I mean, I think with, that's kind of the response to a lot of trauma, isn't it? That it's a repetitive thing, that it either sometimes has a tendency of trying to replay and circulate itself through our experiences,
right.
Or at times that even when we initiate that like repetitive thing to replay it, that could be helpful to our exposure to it. But yeah, there's kind of like a rippling effect to trauma, and it kind of, with me, some of my neuroses involve kind of some OCD tendencies and having that sort of like looping and playing over and over and over, and learning how to release those and let there be closure. It's kind of similar, is it not, to how some of those circular things play out within,
for sure,
within trauma.
So I'm wondering what, like, okay, so I basically just introduced this concept to you, but based on what I just said, what do you think in your religious experience? What were some of your stuck points?
Well, I mean, first, big time speaking, overall view, I'm thinking of kind of what we talked about with Andrew Josko a long time ago when it came to how the Bible was written, and that being a response to
trauma response.
Yeah,
that's
so that kind of like circular,
yeah.
like just stuck points kind of makes sense to me, that it kind of stops.
Like a book that was written because of trauma, hypothetically might cause you to have the same thought
right,
patterns,
it's going to kind of create the same things and have like a circular effect.
Oh, I would never have gone there. That's really interesting.
Some of my big stuck points, though, definitely had to do with my sexuality, that, if I would have or if I had not a blah, or if I would have blah, but none of those blahs were anything generic or were anything specific. It was all just like thought abstract things. Another one I had, and this was a friend of mine had passed, like it was on his deathbed, and I took a nap and didn't hear the phone calls, and then later on, like, had to rush there and was there in his deathbed, and didn't get to speak to him, and then he passed after I was there. But it was like one of those things, like, oh, if I could have gotten there earlier, maybe I could have had a conversation, more closure. But part of your grieving process too is forgiving yourself of those things and releasing some of that. So no, I had a lot of big ones within the faith in my fundamentalism. What about you? What sticks out in your mind?
The first thing that comes to mind for sure is like my quote unquote pornography addiction. It was like, oh, if I had, it's like I waited until I was married to have sex, right? Like, which is more than,
same.
I don't even know what the percentage might be, but it's more than most people can say, right?
69%.
Yeah, 69.
Jesus,
it's nice.
What's wrong with me?
You're a human adult. I don't know.
Bad as human.
If I hadn't watched porn a bunch, like maybe my marriage would have worked, and if my marriage had worked,
shitty husband,
then I mean,
no, I know what you mean though. There's like that, you butterfly affect yourself, like in weird ass
it's
ways.
Like if I had followed the rules better, you know, is what it boils down to. Like maybe I just didn't get it because,
Yeah, and Rebecca's like, if I would have fed that other guy's horse some water, maybe I would have gotten married to him. Was it Rebecca? I don't remember.
Yeah, that sounds right. But, Rebecca actually, right.
What else were you?
That was a callback.
But like another thing though is that sort of like circular thing that you're talking about, these stuck points, creates magical thinking. It kind of promotes it. It's a type of magical thinking.
Sure. Yeah.
And so
it's definitely like if we were to talk about this, like, okay, so stuck points apply specifically to trauma, but if we were to just talk about like that cycling, like that's a mechanism that religion uses to keep people in religion,
like me.
For sure.
Yeah. Oh, maybe if I would have just
it's like that lordship shit you were like into. It's that Paul Washer shit that if I'm not
that
Oh, if you're struggling with sin, then it must be because
I'm not really saved.
You're not devoting your whole self.
But the other thing too is like, oh man, if I would have just fished from the right side of the boat. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, it sounds stupid, but like that sort of shit. And especially if it's trauma induced, it's going to take even more of the logic and the reasoning out of it because it's emotional based. And so that sort of thinking really just kind of gets you stuck, like you said.
Yeah. For sure. So, I mean, I guess like our religious trauma is so stretched out and complex, and it takes so many different forms, right? I mean, it's like a car accident is one thing. When you're in a car accident and you have trauma, you can process the car accident over and over and over and over and over. Mm-hmm. And you can nail down those stuck points a lot easier than like people with religious trauma, which takes place over several years,
complex PTSD,
and it's really difficult to narrow down. Exactly, CPTSD, and it's really difficult to narrow down what specifically was and wasn't traumatizing, if it wasn't just the whole fucking experience, right? So it's like it takes us a lot of time to figure out what our stuck points are. But I think, what are those thoughts that are just like keep popping up? What are the doubts you have? What are the things about your trauma that try to blame you for the trauma? Try to blame you for the thing that happened, or try to blame you for how you feel about it, right? Or the fact that you have trauma at all. Like that's kind of how you would identify those.
Yeah, I think it's important to find those and just kind of find ways healthily through a therapist or whatever to let those go.
Yep.
Speaking of therapist.
Hey, we got a therapist on the show today.
Hello.
Hi, Janice. This is our guest, Janice.
Hi.
Janice, say hi.
Hi, everyone.
Janice comes from a hyper fundamentalist background, and we'll get a little bit into that. And now she's doing a lot of work to help people with their religious trauma. She has a workshop called the Divorcing Religion Workshop, which I love the name of, and we'll get into why it's called that. And then she also has a conference coming up.
Spoiler alert.
Well, that's not the only reason, but that has something to do with it. And she has the court conference, which is centered on religious trauma. No, conference on religious trauma. Sorry, thank you. Conference on religious trauma coming up, which will feature, among other keynote speakers, Marlene Winell, who's been on the show, who we're a big fan of, who is basically the reason this show exists. Bless you, Marlene. Saint Marlene. She would hate that. She's going to ask us to pull our episode because I called her that.
Before we go to commercial, can you tell us 2 interesting things about yourself? Ooh, this is fun.
Let's put her on the spot.
I have been interviewed both by Dr. Phil's producers and Oprah Winfrey's producers.
Oh my God.
Like many years ago.
Yeah.
And I have also spent time in a couple of Canadian penitentiaries.
Oh,
of course, I was leading worship at the time, right? But it sounds more exciting.
Because they send you there for not saying sorry.
She did a dime up there.
Yeah. Not exactly.
For being a radical fundamentalist.
It's like orange is the new black. Well, that is awesome. We are looking forward to diving into your story and to getting some really good advice from you. Looking forward to talking about divorce and grief and how those have to do with deconstructing. But we will be right back
with friends
after this.
Let me kind of unpack that for you a little bit.
And we're back. Thank you for listening to the Life After out there. Those people that are listening out there.
Why you keep on saying out there? What are you, Fifel? Somewhere out there. All right. I don't know why I started on such a high octave. That was weird.
We're here with somewhere.
I was like doing a cartoon voice.
I sang that at a Christian choir group.
What?
In 4th grade, probably.
Why?
I
How was that Christian?
Dude, why any of it, you know? I mean, we also sang Gloria, but I think the teacher just liked it. Okay, anyway, we're here with Janice. We're pretty, she's telling us to wrap it up. We gave her the hand signals and now we need to take them back. Janice, so you grew up in a pretty fundamentalist situation, right? Up there. And are you from British Columbia originally?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I grew up actually in a Pentecostal home. So here we have the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada. They're equally crazy and nutty as the American Pentecostal situation. But I didn't go like totally nuts so fundamentalist until I was married. And my husband at the time, he went to a conservative Bible college, and that's when I started seeing, there's ladies that wear head coverings. What's that about?
So you were kind of like all or nothing. You were like,
she had head coverings, dude.
Yeah, I know. You were like not trying to half-ass this in any way, right? I mean, you were really trying to figure out what you should be doing.
Seriously devoted. Yes, I have always had trouble finding the middle. I always tend to go way over one side or way over the other side. And my faith was no different. And I did grow up in a home where from the time I was born, we were taught about the Bible and about Jesus. Church was regular and several times a week. And my relationship with this Jesus and God was very real to me and very serious to me. So it made sense to me, I guess, as time went on, that I just took it more and more seriously.
We talk a lot on the show kind of about how, like, there was, particularly with millennials, it seems like there was this, like, weird gap where we were, like, indoctrinated so effectively from a young age that it was so much more real to us than it was to our parents. Was that kind of the case for you? Were you, like, more into it even than your parents and your family?
Yes, but I also think that might have to do with being born into it. My parents were not born into it. So my parents got saved, using my air quotes, got saved once they were already adults. But if you're born into it and your indoctrination starts in childhood, your identity doesn't have an opportunity to develop apart from that indoctrination.
Absolutely.
The way that I look at it is, kind of like the frog in the kettle business. But then there's like, what about the tadpoles that were hatched from their eggs inside of the pot? Like that's where they have started. And so you're already at that temperature. And so kind of by the time that we had, our generation, my parents had already been, already cooked. And then that was the only world we knew.
We were like, oh, turn up the heat.
Tell us about the pond.
I have to say that whole pot has to go. If frogs and tadpoles have been boiling in that pot, I don't want that pot anymore.
Yeah, no, I agree. Unless I'm at a French restaurant.
Unless it's Betty Crocker.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Okay.
Croker. I should have said Croker.
Yeah,
Damn it, I ruined that joke.
It's all right.
I really ruined that joke.
Betty Croker?
That's what I meant to say, guys. I'm sorry. Can we edit that joke back to where I don't say the wrong thing first?
No, we're leaving it just like it was, for sure.
Okay.
That's even better. Okay, so your husband, fast forward a little bit because we're all very familiar with the process of childhood indoctrination. Your husband wanted to be a pastor, right? Your first husband, sorry, your former husband, I should say. And you were right on board with him. What did that journey look like? Because it took some interesting kind of dips and turns. You moved around a little bit.
Sure did. So we were introduced by our young adult pastor who totally had it in his mind to set us up. And my former husband was an apologist, very bright fellow, like quite an intellectual person. And I was really attracted to that. And also he seemed to love Jesus very much. So those were like my only two things, really. So shortly after we had our first child, he said that he wanted to go to Bible college, and being the good Christian wife, I, of course, supported him in that. So off we went to rural Alberta, to a very small town. And it was totally different, just going from living in a regular kind of city to this town that only exists because of the Bible college. It was very weird.
Yeah.
Very Stepfordish, you know.
Right. Stepfordish, yeah.
Yeah, totally. And then while we were there, so I became the president of the Student Wives Fellowship and was very involved on campus. I was at home raising our children. We had 2 daughters by then. And then I started noticing women who weren't on the Bible college. They weren't part of the campus, but they would come into town to use the store, and they all wore head coverings. And I thought, what is that about? That's really interesting. And I figured it had something to do with the Bible, but wasn't quite too sure. And then so I decided I would really study it. I studied it in the New Testament, and of course, using lexicons and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
The more I thought, holy cow, why aren't all women still doing this? We haven't been excused from this. And also I saw the head covering as a symbol of submission, and I can have a fairly strong temperament and personality. And my former husband is a fairly meek fellow. And I thought maybe it would help me to be more submissive if I wore this symbol on my head. And I was very serious about my faith. Absolutely believed it. Believed everything in the Bible was true. I just didn't question it at all. And I wanted to be, live as close to a biblical, godly life as I could. So I approached my husband and said, do you mind if I start wearing a covering? I think that it is biblical, and I'm interested in exploring this. And he said, okay, yeah, go for it. And then I also started fellowshipping more with these people, and it was a very closed group of Mennonites. So I kind of became a Mentecostal. So kind of Mennonite, but still had the Pentecostal.
Like pre-Mentecostal or post-Mentecostal?
You can't ask women if they're post-Pentecostal.
They're post-Mentecostal. I'm really glad that I'm glad we're talking about this because I don't think we've ever talked about any Anabaptist sect on the show. And Mennonites are just it's so interesting to me. And I think a lot of people don't even really know that they exist. So what was that community like?
Well, I, like you, I just thought this is fascinating. This is a fascinating opportunity to peek into a culture that most outsiders don't get to see. And so stopped wearing any makeup, any jewelry, covered my hair, only wore long skirts and dresses, no more pants, no more shorts. Didn't cut my daughter's hair. So both my girls, they had hair down to their waist, and no TV. Only Christian influences in the home. We had a TV, but only to watch VeggieTales, like VHS tapes.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, that was acceptable.
Back in the day. Yeah. Yes, indeed. So the people on the Bible college campus thought I was going a little nuts, going a little too conservative, but for my truly conservative friends, I was still much too worldly. And so we would attend their services, and they didn't have a pastor. It was always just a different man from the congregation who was speaking. And they were separated, the women on one side, men on the other, for seating, and no instruments. It was interesting. I felt that they were very genuine. I felt like they were very genuine. There was a simplicity there. Certainly, higher education wasn't something that they pushed at all. Their kids were generally done school between grade 8 and 10. And if they bought a new car, they would rip out the stereo. That sort of thing. And I would go to their homes.
Just as little outside influence as possible. Right.
Yes. And if they owned a business, they could have a fax machine, but they certainly couldn't do email or anything like that. They couldn't have TVs, but they could have microwaves and dishwashers. So there were different rules. And then for me, I could have a pattern on my clothing. Say I could have flowers on but there were rules about the size of that pattern.
Whoa.
Yeah. So it couldn't be as small as a dime because that was too busy. Couldn't be as large really as a loonie. Couldn't even really be as large as a quarter because then you're trying to draw attention to yourself. So you're always kind of like, well, where am I? What can I do?
You always keep your change on you when you go clothes shopping.
That's right.
I relate.
I'm gonna measure that.
I relate to that though, that, you know, whenever there is such a weird rule and you don't know if the guideposts are you don't know if the posts are moving because it's all so fucking abstract.
Yeah, it's very subjective.
There's no way to verify or to test to check your answers or to test anything. It's just, I remember when I was younger, I was afraid to wear too much black. Oh my God, what if they think that I'm like, goth or something?
I listen to Marilyn Manson.
Right? But it was kind of that
same... He had 2 ribs removed to suck his own dick. He didn't.
God. But that's kind of that same thing, though, isn't it? Of like, where we're constantly having to guess. And it kind of creates like a thing for our brain to latch onto and stick with. Or I don't know.
You know that's... Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Go on.
I mean, I was
It's
just going to say, well, whatever. I talk all the time on the show. I was really drawn to the Mennonite communities. I never got personally involved in one, but I had friends that were. And part of why it was interesting is because of the just like raw asceticism was just like, oh, we're rejecting technology, we're rejecting like luxuries, right? And I was really drawn to that because Jesus said, the Son of Man has no place to rest his head, or like,
yes.
The rich young fools, like sell everything you have and give it to the poor and then come follow me. And I was like really into those particular teachings, and like to the point where I was very anti-mainstream evangelicalism because it was so obviously materialistic and like Americanized and westernized. So I was drawn to. I was never quite that extreme, but I was really drawn to that kind of asceticism. So it's interesting that you bring all that up.
Yeah, the fundamentalism, extreme rule following for me was very comfortable. So my Pentecostal home that I grew up in, my dad is very volatile emotionally. Unfortunately, there's some mental health issues there. So my siblings and I learned early on that there's great benefit in following rules. We could figure out what the rules were. We could be safe. So that's kind of how I lived my life, just being very, very safe. And even now, I've been out of religion for a number of years. It's very hard for me to break rules. It's still hard for me after all this time. My partner teases me about it. He's all the time trying to push me to to break those rules.
Sure.
But I still struggle with it. And that's part of, for sure, what drew me to this closed Mennonite group. I thought, here are some people who actually love God so much that they are really willing to eschew everything that the world has to offer.
Yes,
it's sort of like there's a brand of fundamentalism, or of like, even I don't even know if it's fundamentalism particularly, but just anybody that's really, really trying to follow the Bible is like, you get into this pattern where you're like, if there's not a rule for it, we need to make a rule for it. We need to like come up with something. That it, I mean, and you end up with things like quarter-sized versus dime-sized flowers,
Yeah.
And you can go down that spiral forever, and it also happens to give preachers like infinite material to talk about,
That is true.
So you just keep making more and more rules.
What my husband at the time said, as I kept, making things narrower and narrower, he said, "You're making your circle smaller and smaller. What's going to be left?" He had some wisdom there, but he didn't become religious until he was in his late teens. So again, he had grown up with an identity that was formed. I didn't. My identity completely revolved around being a Christian, being a fundamentalist, and then it was being a homeschool mom.
That's really interesting. about what you were saying about making your circle smaller, because I know that the last church community that I was really involved in was a Calvinistic, high pressure community.
Oh, good times.
Yeah, you know it. And it got to the point where I was thinking about how small we thought the body of Christ was, or how small we thought the church was.
Oh, the remnant.
The remnant. But, it
the elect.
Well, what really bothered me was, we had Charles Spurgeon, who said that that God showed, his love and his forgiveness and his grace more because, there's more of that of him and then his wrath. But I kept thinking, I'm like, no, the Bible says narrow is the way. So you do the math there and it's like, no, he's displaying his wrath and sending people to hell more than he's sending his love. But I'm like, but wait, God is love. And so that started to kind of create for me a little bit of like topsy-turvy bullshit. But
so getting back to like the flow, the timeline of your story, what was it that started to make you break free from that? So what's interesting about your story is that a lot of our listeners sort of like gradually, like me personally, as opposed to Brady, like gradually like become more liberal and sort of like shed certain rules with like a certain number of excuses or whatever, and then you make your way out. But you were like entrenched in fundamentalism, and then you were like, I got to get out of here. So how did that process happen for you?
Yeah. There were some little things along the way, I think, that made holes in my armor, chinks in my armor, right? So thinking of where women stand or fall or kneel into fundamentalism, right? You've got God way up here, and then the pastor, minister just under God, and then the husband, and then way down here you have the wife. And that didn't sit right with me sometimes, because it's hard to be completely obedient to a human being that is fallible. And they sometimes make very poor decisions. And those decisions are going to negatively impact you as a wife and also your children. But you don't have any recourse. You're just forced to go along. So some of those decisions were pretty hard. And he ended up taking a pastoring job in an even smaller town. Oh my God, in Saskatchewan. It was a nightmare. And the whole time there was very difficult, just one thing after another. And it was quite a calamitous time in my personal life. My parents divorced. My nephew went to prison. There was one thing after another. And here I was trying to live as pleasing of a life as I could. And then our youngest daughter received a life-threatening diagnosis, and we went bankrupt partly as a result of that. And so that was just like, that was it. And received no emotional support from the church at all. If anything, was just questioned. Well, what sin might you be harboring?
That business, right?
Yeah.
And I finally just thought, I'm done. I've bet on the wrong horse. Like that, everything about my life has been completely wrong. And so that was very devastating and shocking, and not at all what I expected for myself or my life. It wasn't what I wanted. And my marriage was also coming apart at this time. So it had really been a series of traumas very close together. We didn't even have time to catch our breath in between them. And that's what ultimately shook me free from my cognitive dissonance, was those tragedies that came. And it just made me go, what the hell is happening here? This is not how it's supposed to be.
God, yes. Oh my God. That's like what my brain just repeated over and over and over, was it was not supposed to be like this. It was not supposed to be like this. And then But what you're saying, that what I really resonated with was what you said about you bet on the wrong horse. And there comes a point in my situation too, where I put all of my eggs in this one basket, and it got to the point where it's like, okay, if I don't fucking take my eggs out of here, we're all going to get smashed.
Right.
You know, and there just comes a part where you have to wake up to that and just, like you said, just have that cognitive dissonance just shook free. And God, what a relief though.
I mean, it is and it isn't. It isn't.
It is and isn't, right? But it's not like anything. It's not like anything gets like immediately fixed, but it's like dropping one big burden that you don't need to be doing, but also your body is going to have to take a while to adjust to. God, stop! But it's going to have to like adjust to that, like that load being different. Yeah,
that's right. The image that I often use of it is a beach ball that's held underwater for too long. And eventually you can't hold it under there, and that thing is going to come up to the surface, and there's going to be fallout because it's such a huge release of energy. And so my children had a front row seat to my gong show deconversion, which I'm sure was traumatizing in itself to them. And they're adults now; they're 20 and 22, and have very close relationships with my daughter and with their dad. He also has walked his own journey away from the church. Oh, good. And we all just remain very close.
That's nice. Oh, that sounds so nice. I wish my parents and people, a bunch of people in my life would have just like, oh yeah, I'm out too,
Are any of your family members available to talk shit about your gong show deconstruction? Just kidding.
Yeah, right. We'll be featuring a snippet, like a audio clips of them at the beginning.
One of the documentaries that I watched were about these Mormon boys who finally got out of it, and the first thing that they did was they dyed their hair and gave each other mohawks.
Hell yeah!
I wish we would have done that. Yeah. All three of us. You guys wanted to?
I mean, I don't know. That's cool, but I just had sex with somebody. That was way more fun.
I ran to the tattoo parlor.
There you go.
Nice.
What
did you get? Am I allowed to ask that?
Oh yes. So when my oldest daughter turned 16 or was turning 16, she said she wanted to get a tattoo, and I was like, well, she wanted it when she was 14. I said, no freaking way. But at 16, they'll do it in Canada if you have parental permission. So I said, well, you have to do some research. I want to know what you want to get, why you want to get it, and then also that you know how to care for it. And so I see the symbol just behind you guys on the wall there.
Yeah.
And she said, Mom, that's what I've chosen.
Oh, that's a really good choice.
I want you to get one that matches. So we both have incorporated that symbol, but our tattoos are different. But that was the first tattoo for both of us.
I love that.
She has had many more. Canadian girls really like tattoos. And I just have one more. But yeah, it was very cool. It was significant for me, because it was letting go. It was releasing some of the boundaries that I had kept myself trapped in. So, yeah.
Very cool.
My parents were mortified. They're mortified. My dad is still deeply religious. My mom is much more flexible, shall we say.
Yeah.
So we're going to take a break. When we get back, we're going to talk about how the fuck you became a counselor after all that. So I'm interested in that. That'll be good.
All right.
We're going to take a quick break.
Oh, hello there, Chuck. I didn't see you there. How are you?
Good. Just editing the episode. What's up?
What's up? Oh, you commoner and your common talk. I guess I'm what you would say, doing not much.
What is this?
Chuck, psst, Chuck, it's me, your pal Brady. I'm practicing patronizing, so I'm working on being more condescending to people. Oh, do you have any idea where Matt can get some crumpets around here?
Why are you doing this?
For our Patreon. We've been asking people to patronize our page, and I didn't want to ask them to do something I wasn't willing to do it myself, so I figured I'd get some practice in.
Oh, God. Brady, no, that's not what it means.
Oh, no?
Listen. Listeners can go to our Patreon page, pick the level you want to contribute. Oh. Each level has special rewards.
Okay.
Like exclusive Life After mini-sodes.
Or not safe for work bloopers?
are like a monthly collection of deconstruction memes.
And even personal consultations or meet up with your favorite host, Chuck and Brady?
Yeah. Brady. Patreon.com/thelifeafter.
I guess even you could find it.
Welcome back to The Life After. We're here with our guest, Janice and Brady. Hi, Brady.
Hey.
Janice, so we just talked about your leaving fundamentalism, which is like, I love the way you're just like, just hit the brakes and we're like, I'm getting out of here.
I'm taking his head covering off.
I'm taking this head covering off, and like left it in the. I'm picturing her like driving down a ambiguous highway, like in the head covering, like flies at the camera.
The first episode of Breaking Bad.
Horizon. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, except without the underwear.
There was a burial, actually. There was a burial
of your head covering. Oh, tell me that story.
Yeah. Oh, it's really important in recovery to acknowledge what's gone on, where you've come from, what's happened, where you're at now, and just having some kind of releasing ceremony. So for me, that involved a burial.
Very cool.
With my head covering.
I love it.
I don't need it anymore.
Did anybody say some words or anything? Did you have?
Just me.
Just you?
Just
yeah.
me.
Good.
That's beautiful.
Was it like in your backyard or was it a special place?
That was a couple houses ago.
Okay.
I should have put a little stone, a little gravestone.
Somebody's going to be like digging. Somebody's going to be like, and I want to put the garden bed here and then like a head covering and then the police are going to come.
Well, I have a question. When you kind of did that ceremony, was that during a time that you were going through therapy to go through your fundamentalism, or was this kind of a thing that you were discovering as you were pursuing counseling?
Well, so when I divorced religion, it was right around the same time I was divorcing my husband. The marriage was also coming apart. And I decided to go back to school. And I always have had somewhat of a counselor's mindset and heart for other people. So I thought I'll go back to school for counseling, become a professional counselor. And while I was doing my schooling, it just brings up everything, because you have to be prepared to work with other people in their own situations of loss and grief. So you first have to be sure that you've really dealt with your own. And so it was a time for me to explore some pretty dark places, some pretty hard places that had to do directly with my loss of faith.
That transition is so tricky and difficult, and I love that you had a ritual for that, because it's just so helpful, and it's like something that it's an Ebenezer of sorts, if you will.
Yeah. I know what
to use a biblical reference. It's something that you can go back to and be like, oh yeah, no, I decide, like I literally buried that, and that's super cool. So okay, so you went back to school to be a counselor. What went into that decision? Because for me, like making the decision to trust, like for a lot of fundamentalists, like going from like I'm deep into this like religion and this fundamentalism and this rigidity to like I'm trusting science and psychology. It seems like such a huge leap to me. And just to trust it is hard, but to be like, oh, I'm going to do this
I'm gonna
now.
master that stuff. Yeah.
So how did that work for you?
Well, my deconversion was very lonely. I didn't know anybody else who had deconverted.
Same.
And frankly, I didn't even have the words for it. I mean, I could sit in front of my computer and I didn't know the word deconstruct or deconvert or religious trauma or anything like that. And so how could I possibly get in touch with other people? So I just kind of went limping along in my life, trying to just keep going. Like everything I ever believed in and thought about myself had dissolved and was ash all around me, but I still had rent to pay. So you just keep going. And then while I was doing my schooling, the weight of the grief really started to show up for me. I started to understand, and I realized I had to face this. I had to look at this. And then along the way, so after I had completed my schooling, I ran into Dr. Marlene Winell on the internet. And of course, she's written her book, Leaving the Fold.
Yeah.
And I saw her an old interview. I think she was maybe on CNN. And I was just so impressed. And I suddenly felt like, okay, there's at least one other person that can relate to me. So I reached out to Marlene and went to some of her retreats and started growing my own support network. And it made such a profound difference for me to be able to talk about what happened and be with other people who had been just as devout in their beliefs.
Yes.
And they knew what it was like to walk away from that. And some of them were ministers, and so they lost their career. Some, if people were maybe involved in Jehovah's Witness or Mormonism, they step away from that and they entirely lose their family. I lost my Christian community. I lost all my church friends. But I still had, my brothers are atheist. My children, I still have contact with them. So I have that. But I still had, other painful losses.
So it sounds to me like the psychological approach that Marlene has, which is obviously, I think, super effective. Very, to use a Pokemon term, super effective. Very, obviously, very effective. It was helpful for you. You found a sense of community. You also found a sense of direction, which is maybe one of the hardest things about deconverting. And you were like, oh, this seems to be a good path to follow.
Yeah, I had already had my own counseling practice for a year or two by the time I stumbled across Marlene and her important work. And I had been trying to figure out how, where do I want to specialize? What do I want to do? And it really solidified for me as I started meeting and coming in contact with more and more people who are struggling with religious trauma syndrome, trying to get their lives back together. I had not realized how deep and wide this issue is.
Right.
So now I've really focused my energy into working with other people who are in recovery.
So I love your approach. I was looking at your website. So Janice has as I mentioned earlier, has a workshop called Divorcing Religion. It's a 7-module workshop. It's like a week-by-week thing. You go through these different concepts. You work through your own stuff. You do some writing. You do some thinking.
And it's online.
It's online, yeah. So it's very easy to access, and I think it's a fantastic step-by-step approach. I mean, I think there are probably a lot of ways to approach this that are effective, and I definitely think this is one of the ways that is effective if you're looking for something. So I wanted to ask you. I don't want to it's like tempting to let's just go through all these modules, but that would spoil the surprise, right? So I wanted to ask you, what are some of the biggest divergencies from good mental health that Christianity teaches? In other words, what are the things that Christianity, evangelicalism, fundamentalism teach that are the most divergent from what we actually know about mental health that stand out to you?
I can tell you the main areas that clients bring to me that I see repeated over and over again. Purity culture just has had a massive, incredibly negative impact on an entire generation. Absolutely. So when I was growing up in the church, we didn't have the name purity culture for it, but it still existed only for people like yourselves. And it's been taken even farther, where these young girls go to this purity ball and pledge themselves to their father. And I'm never going to have sex. I'm not going to masturbate. I'm not going to think about. And I mean, good Lord, if you happen to be attracted to the same sex, So, and then I have people interactions with people now who have left religion, and maybe they're still a virgin, and they're in their 30s and 40s, some of them, and they're saying, I don't even know how to approach a person for a date. I wouldn't know what to do on a date. It's just, there are such huge gaps in their awareness.
Well, not to mention, like, I mean, other people aside, like, unfamiliar with their own sexuality in so many ways, right?
And afraid of it, afraid to explore that. And certainly, when I was deconstructing, I felt I was finally free for the first time to explore my own sexuality. And I had always known that I was attracted to women as well as to men. And I got to a point where I felt like, okay, this is a part of me I'm going to look at and explore and go further with, and really enjoyed. It was wonderful. My current partner is a male, but I have had relationships with women as well. But that's something that I would not have felt the freedom to do if I was still entrenched in my religion.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Not even close, right?
That's right. So purity culture is a big one. Certainly the grief aspect. So I remember how many times going to Christian funerals and they say, we don't grieve as the world grieves. Essentially, which shuts you down, invalidates your sadness. You better not feel sad because you're not being grateful to God if you're feeling sad because your loved one has gone on to glory and you should just be rejoicing. And that is such
I forgot about that. It's horrible.
Theology. It is. And fundamentalism. So we talk about fundamentalism right now in terms of religion, but you can have a fundamentalist attitude towards nutrition, towards ecology, and it's similar if you say you've been a vegetarian your whole life or a vegan even, and then you get pancreatic cancer. That's like, what the hell? And it's a similar thing if you've been a Christian your whole life and your child gets killed by a drunk driver.
That's a good point.
So now you're grieving this massive loss, but at the same time, all of your beliefs are falling away too, because I followed all the rules, and this is what's happening.
Right.
So grief is a very big deal.
And not to mention, like, if the person that passed is not a Christian, then you have a whole different, like, it doubles down on the grief, and now it's like an eternal. It's like it's so much worse than like they are just asleep, right? It's like they're suffering. There's like this belief.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then there can also be a lot of guilt that people pile on top of themselves too. Should have been able to
about
convince
stuck
that
points
person somehow. Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's what I was thinking of what you were saying at the beginning, is having those things where we try to blame ourselves and we fit it in strange ass ways that God just normally wouldn't ever be there.
Yeah, it's so true. And so one of the modules actually in the course, I think it might be my favorite one. It's about grief. It's called Uncomfortably Numb, Grieving Your Losses. And it's the second module, and I feel like it is so important because people who have never been religious, they don't understand if you tell them I'm not a Christian anymore, or I don't believe anymore. They're just like, so what? You grew up, you stopped believing in Santa, big deal. They don't get that this was your fundamentalists, your beliefs and your identity are totally enmeshed. So when that's ripped apart, it is extremely challenging to go on.
Yes. Yeah. And so I want to circle back to that because I think that's super important, but I want to rewind a little bit. So we have talked so much about on this show about purity culture, but it's like, I always feel like we can't talk about it enough because it's like, it has such a broad effect, right? Like it really disembodies you. It teaches you not to trust your body. So then you have issues with like, anxiety and depression and like trust and like feeling the feelings that you have in your body and all of that. I mean, just even sexuality aside, it just has all of these other broad effects on the way that we experience humanity, right? What, in your experience, do you think is the and I mean it's never this simple because we all have to work through things on our own, but like, what is the antidote? What's the opposite of purity culture? What can our listeners do to help themselves just push through that?
That's a great question.
Right. I think education is paramount. We need to educate ourselves very thoroughly on our own body and also our partner's body. We need to know, we actually need to know the names of things. We need to know the function of things, how parts work, how parts fit together. Even so, I know this can be a sticky topic or a thorny topic, the whole idea of pornography, but some people, it could be helpful for them to maybe start viewing some more intimate programming, shall we say. And certainly there are ethical boundaries, and there is an ethical push on in that community.
Right.
But so for some people, maybe watching some things might be helpful, it's like you have to really grow yourself up because you've been kept very infantile. You've been kept, you're really just prepubescent. And there's been such a disconnect. You have to bring about that integration somehow, that you're in this body and you're allowed to feel pleasure and you're allowed to give pleasure to other people. It's really so much like you're constantly trying to flush out all the chewing gum that's stuck in your brain from all this nonsense that we were indoctrinated with. So it takes some education. It also takes a lot of self-compassion because we don't do ourselves any good when we're beating ourselves up for not knowing this.
Right.
Or maybe we've feel like we've gone on a date and we've really screwed it up by saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing or something.
What do you mean by self-compassion? Because that's a foreign concept to a lot of people who grew up in fundamentalism. Because you're bad, right? So like, you don't deserve needs, you don't deserve compassion, you don't deserve happiness, right? Go ahead.
I like to have my clients make a list of 25 things, and 25 can be pretty challenging. 25 things that you really like about yourself, and they're not physical attributes. They can be things that you feel good about. It can be, I got my driver's license. It can be something like that. It can be, people feel safe with me. Like just really where we tend to be like Velcro for negative and like Teflon for positive. So we really have to be feeding ourselves, reminding ourselves, I am worthwhile. I do have these qualities that are really great and that are good for me and that are good for society. But we have to work at it.
I like what you said about being Velcro for bad and Teflon for good, because I think that from my Calvinistic background and also just fundamentalism in general, growing up Southern Baptist, we were kind of conditioned to do that. If we did anything good, it's like, oh, it wasn't us, it was the Lord through us. If we did anything bad, well, we knew that the Lord would never lead us in temptation, and so it had to be from us. So it kind of becomes like this auto way of sorting out each one of our experiences, and even coming out of that, we're kind of haunted by the ghost of that fundamentalism because it's what's keeping us from being able to rest, It's constantly making bumps in the night.
Yes. This is where cognitive behavioral therapy can be very helpful.
Right.
And where a big part of a counselor's task is accompanying the client on a journey of acceptance. So you're holding up a mirror to them, a lantern and a mirror, really. You want them to see themselves accurately and accept what has happened, but also the point of the present is where the power is. So maybe these difficult things happen to us, but today we're right here. It's right here and right now. And we have a choice in how to proceed.
So cool.
I would define cognitive behavioral therapy as being able to kind of take our thoughts, judging if they're helpful or not, and be not judgmental when we're listening to them, right? And then to say, okay, this is helpful or it's not. But I hear some people who come from fundamentalist backgrounds, because for me, it was very helpful. That's, that therapy was very beneficial to me. But I've heard some people say that it kind of brings them back to that hold every thought captive.
Take each thought into captivity.
Yeah. So what would you say to that? Because it wasn't my experience, so I don't know how to really explain that in a way that would be helpful for those people who might be experiencing.
I mean, the difference is, I'm going to jump in real quick because I think the difference is that in one, you're holding your thoughts against an unattainable standard, and in another one, you're saying, like, is this helpful to me or not? Right?
But when you're a fundamentalist, questioning, is this helpful, is sometimes going to be kind of a
it gets wrapped up in, right? But it can also be liberating to, like, ask that question because you've never been allowed to before, right?
That's a good point.
But
and what we explore is whether it's true. Is this, so I have this thought, well, is that thought true? What evidence do we have that thought is true? Because of course that's anxiety gets all wrapped up in that, and I can't go in an elevator because the elevator might crash or whatever. Then you have to be looking at, well, how often do elevators actually crash? Looking at it that way.
That's how I had to start doing it as a kid, like after a horror movie. It's funny because we actually brought up as a joke Mothman prophecies, but I remember very specifically seeing that movie and driving home thinking that Richard Gere was going to attack my car with his, his powdery wings. It's been a while since I've seen that movie.
And he's such a good Buddhist. I don't think he would ever do that.
But if I have my headlights on and those moth tendencies come in, those moth instincts, you got to go for it. But I remember as a kid, like seeing a movie like that and being scared, and then rationalizing with myself of, well, what are the chances of this actually happening, and why would I see this monster after seeing this movie? Because me seeing this movie is not at all going to affect the chances of me. So I had to logic my way out of that fear, but it's not that much different of what I do as an adult and how I process my own things and how I process, because I look at fundamentalism or belief in a scary literal God as kind of the same way as I approach my anxiety and everything, is by saying, is this real? Do I have evidence that this is going to be a threat? Or am I creating anxiety in my own head, creating my own circles that don't need to be there? One thing that helped me was to finally learn how to not have judgment over my thoughts, which I think was a hard part of cognitive behavioral therapy for some people, is to have to learn how to look at something without judgment. When we're told as Christians we don't judge, but really what we mean by that is, well, we're not going to send you to hell. We're not going to send you to hell. That's what judging means. Or some other thing that has like a very religious idea. But non-judgment thinking, that isn't how real people define it. How would real people define that, especially in the context of cognitive behavior therapy?
I really think just being aware of the thought. I mean, even just trying to accept it as, so this is the thought that I have. But for me, sometimes I have to go farther back and say, where did this thought originate from? Because that helps me to release myself from any judgment. Oh, this thought came, and that sometimes if people have a really strong trigger reaction, I encourage them to stop. Well, first you want to remove yourself from the situation. If you can go into the bathroom, get away, have a little bit of privacy there, pour a little bit of water on your hands, something like that. But you want to be thinking, what am I feeling? So you want to name your feeling, because that cognitively, that gives you some space between the emotion. If you have to stop and think about, what am I feeling? And then I want you to think about the last time that you felt what you're feeling this intensely. What was the situation? And the time before that, and the time before that. I want you to try and trace it back. And often it's something that happened in childhood. But once we actually get to that point where it's like, oh, I remember my dad was standing over me and he was yelling and he had his hand up like this. And that's the same feeling I get when I'm in this situation.
Yes.
Then I don't blame myself so much anymore.
I like what you said about the water. I feel like having the water, just like a physical sensational
like
thing to kind of like
thing,
help
for
center
sure.
you. I think that's really good advice.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So-
and even giving yourself permission when you're feeling triggered, giving yourself permission to leave that situation for a minute. You don't have to, you're an adult. You don't, unless you have to stay busy watching your young child and you have to be there. Any other situation, virtually, you can leave. So give yourself permission sometimes if you need to step away.
I love that.
So we need to take a break, but before we take a break, I wanted to point out one other thing. Is that you mentioned, so specifically talking about purity culture, you mentioned education as being one of the most important things, which I completely agree with. There's so much to know, and we were denied that education, especially if you had a Christian education. But even so, like, it's not like public education really dives into the functionality of your sexuality, which is, really important to know about. But I would even say
vaginas were in the front until I was like 29.
like a belly button or something.
A little below it, probably.
Yeah, a little below the belly button. 29. How old?
How old? I had a kid by 29.
Yeah. Somehow we don't know how that worked, but it was in the dark. That's all we know. No, I'm just kidding. But even beyond that, sex positivity versus sex negativity, right? Like, I mean, obviously fundamentalism is extremely sex negative. It is like any sexual feelings that you have are bad unless you're a married person and they are towards your spouse, right? In all of that, there's just so much to counter that. There's so many ways that people experience pleasure, and they're all valid. All of the ways are valid, whether it's viewing pornography or whether it's like nipple clamps or whether it's like, orgies or whatever, like within like the bounds of consent and respect and all that stuff. Like, pleasure is just a good thing, and it's okay, and it's fine, and if you're checking in with yourself, and if you're feeling good about it.
Oh my God! If you touch your nipples one more time,
I didn't touch my nipples.
Like 5 times while you're giving
I did
the
not
speech.
touch my. No, my nipples are here. Did I touch my belly? My nipples aren't up. My nipples aren't down here.
God, just go. Just go on.
I'm just really getting warm in here thinking about this, okay? No. But education regarding pleasure and what pleasure can mean is like also super important.
It is. And actually, that's like the most fun education that we can do when it relates to purity culture is educating ourselves on what feels good.
Absolutely.
What brings us pleasure. And that's an important piece of homework we need to give your listeners, that they need to spend some time tonight in their bedroom or their bathroom or wherever, figuring out what feels good to them, because then they also need to learn how to express that to their partner.
Yeah.
This is what feels really good to me, and
Very
I would love for you to do this.
Yes. Yeah, yes. And that's, I feel like that like took me like probably 2 years to get comfortable doing, like expressing to my partners what I'm into. Because
everything is so black and white with fundamentalism. And so when it comes about like taking care of others, it's always at our expense. Mm-hmm. But, this whole like mutual pleasure thing isn't always available. And I think that it is important to know what we like, right? Because if we want it done to us, we want that or the similar, the whatever that version is for them, done for them, so part of that loving others is loving yourself.
Loving yourself.
I like it. Yeah. And I mean, even so, spending time masturbating is actually, so there are more uses for it, like than just the obvious sexual pleasure. If you feel a migraine coming on, break out the vibrator.
Yeah.
Like if you are creatively stuck, if you're an artist or a writer or whatever, spend some time enjoying yourself. Kind of get those juices flowing, so to speak. It's just a It's a wonderful thing to do. We're so
Absolutely.
lucky to be human.
Yeah.
That's a great part of being human. And the more orgasms men have, it helps to stave off prostate cancer.
See,
So-
even better.
You really want to, yes, it's important.
Yeah.
And it makes us less jerks.
Yep. It makes you less of a shithead. We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we're going to talk about grieving God, which is not something we've gotten too into on this show, so I'm interested to see where it goes.
I'm really excited about this, honestly. We'll be right back right after this. If you were going to die tonight, do you know where
Stop. Just tell them about our website.
Oh, just tell them to go to thelifeafter.org?
Yes, they can go now, even without accepting Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior. thelifeafter.org. We have a blog, contact page, a link to our Facebook page, and more.
All right, thelifeafter.org.
Heavenly. And we're back. Thanks for listening, everybody. We're here with Janice. Janice, so a whole week, a whole segment of your workshop is on grief. And I was really excited when I saw that, because we really haven't talked too much about the idea of grieving your religious experience, grieving the God that you were like so attached to and so close to. So I was having a conversation with a friend, and I told him I would say this on the show because I thought it was great. I was talking to my friend recently, and he bought a plant, and he actually bought 3 plants, and he bought the plants for the purpose of grief. And he named the plants these 3 different things, but one of the plants is God. He named the plant God, and part of his grieving process is that he's going to take care of the plant for a while, and that is God. And he's going to like acknowledge that it was an important part of his life and nurture that part of himself. And then when he's ready to let it go, I think he's just going to let the plant die and just sort of like, it's like a symbol. It's like a physical thing that he's doing to sort of say like, to sort of go back. I mean, he's been deconstructed for years, probably as long as I have, but he's going back and saying like, I don't know, I never properly grieved God, so let me nurture this for a little bit. Let me spend some time with it. Let me have something physical that reminds me that it's like something that I need to do, and then let me let it go. And I thought that was really cool, and it sort of got me thinking about grief. And then I was looking at your stuff, and you're all about it. So, how do you grieve something that doesn't exist?
Wow, that's a big one.
Uh-huh.
I just going back to that interesting idea that your friend has with the plant. Rituals are so important. We have rituals for starting and rituals for finishing. Rituals symbolize a time of transition in our lives. So I shared with you a little bit earlier about burying a head covering.
Mm-hmm.
I also would encourage people to write a letter to God, to the God that they worshipped, and say in there all the things, all the ways they have been so disappointed, finding out that God isn't even real, all the different things in there. And then go to a cemetery and find a angel statue or something like that, and just sit there and read your letter. Take someone important with you, if you like, and make him witness it. And, you can come home and burn the letter in your fire pit if you want. You can make up your own kind of releasing ritual or ceremony, but it's a demarcation. It symbolizes, this is what I believed, and I believed it so wholeheartedly. And now I'm moving on in this other portion of my life without that belief anymore. And it's acknowledging the grief that you feel, and it's liberating yourself.
I feel like it's just it's so often overlooked. The idea that when we're talking about deconstruction, like a lot of people are so angry up front that it's sort of like, I don't want anything to do with that. So the idea of like acknowledging its importance again after all of that is just such a challenge.
And recognizing that anger is a very legitimate part of the grieving process.
Yes.
Damn straight.
It makes sense to be angry, but we don't want to get stuck there. When you get stuck in it, it becomes toxic, right?
Right.
But it's okay to feel anger about the years and the money, everything that I sacrificed, all the time that I invested. I could have gone to university. I could have done all these other things. So it makes sense that we're going to feel some anger about those. And the best thing we can do is see if we can use that anger somehow to spur us or fuel us on into change instead of staying stuck there.
I'm thinking back to where we were talking earlier about a CBT of non-judgmentalness, of like processing our emotions and to be able to look at them as a third party and say, hey, that's what this emotion is, not the judgment with it. But what the sneaky thing about anger and shit is, that's a trigger word of like, that's a sin. That's one of the deadly sins, or not one of the deadly sins, but that's considered that. So
wrath.
one of like the trigger words that I've noticed for me, when I say trigger words, I mean like literally like almost like magic words that were conditioned to, have us respond in a certain way.
Yeah. I don't feel angry, or I don't get angry.
Right.
Like, it's a big part of.
Well, but like one of them is like, well, Brady, you're bitter. You're showing bitterness, and that word is magic because we give it that abstract power.
Sure.
Because we are conditioned to give it that. But when bitterness is so ingrained in our head as a pushing against the system and power, that fucks up our ability to grieve.
Yes.
That's shitty, right? It's like one of those things that gets us stuck and it keeps us from leaving.
Yes. And even to just thinking of someone saying to you, oh, Brady, you're bitter, that has such an air of condescension to it, and such an air of it's just heavy laden with judgment. So-and-so's bitter. You sound bitter. Well, you know what? Sometimes I do feel bitter. Sometimes I'm pretty pissed off about all this stuff that has gone on.
And sometimes, it's completely justified much of the time. Right?
Yes. But to keep ourselves in that space, I think, is to short circuit our own healing.
Ooh, I like that.
To prevent our growth. So we don't want to stay there. Thinking of grief, in this module, in the Divorcing Religion workshop, I examined 3 different types of grief or loss that we experience when we deconvert or deconstruct. The first one is ambiguous loss. So ambiguous loss occurs when there's no body. There's no closure.
Okay.
Because maybe they've been kidnapped. They've died in an airplane wreck. They were blown up in a bomb. There's nothing left. So it's ambiguous. There's no closure. There's disenfranchised grief. And disenfranchised grief are losses that are not openly acknowledged or socially sanctioned. So if you think of maybe a person has been having an affair with someone, both parties are married, and then that one person dies. So it's your lover that's dead, but you can't mourn that loss.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Or my family member went to prison for a very violent crime, and he was quite young. But we could only show outrage at what he had done. But our family was also being torn apart, and we were very sad knowing that our loved one, who was only 18, was going to be spending, a long, long time in prison with terrifying people. But we couldn't really grieve that. And that is the same when we lose our faith. Society doesn't understand it.
Yeah.
Right.
And also actually people who are adopted into other families, they have a type of disenfranchised grief because they're expected only to be grateful that this wonderful, loving family took them in. They don't get to mourn the loss of their identity.
Wow.
And this is a big deal, disenfranchised grief. And then the last grief that I talk about is unresolved grief. And it tends to be cumulative in nature. And it's basically like unfinished business. So people who are taking the workshop, I'll have them make a list of losses that just occurred in their life. I mean, maybe they're from the time they were little. So maybe their dog died, their parents divorced. There's all these different things. Because if our parents haven't modeled for us adequately how to grieve, we don't really know how to grieve. And just that sadness gets kind of stuck inside. And what we want to do is we want to be able to bring it out and release that energy, that emotion from us. Sometimes I'll have people watch a very sad movie because even if they feel like they can't cry, maybe they can identify with the loss that's occurred in this movie somehow, and that can get things moving for them emotionally. But grief is very significant. We have multiple losses when we deconstruct. Yeah. It's not just one thing. It's many losses. And we need to look at them and grieve for them.
Can I share a story about some disenfranchised, how do you say it? I'm sorry.
Disenfranchised grief?
Disenfranchised grief. There you go. There you go. So at the same time as my deconstruction, it was in the middle of my divorce and everything was going on. My best friend just died of sudden heart failure. And it was really compounded on the other things that were going on, and it was hard. And so I didn't have the time to grieve the loss of him because it was literally right in the middle of my divorce, and
wow.
I was in survival mode, So years later, and this is just like recently, there was a Netflix show called Dead to Me that I watched one weekend, and it hit me about how I am a frustrated person because I didn't give myself the ability to grieve, or the option to, of him who passed, and also Jason is his name, and also God. That just the idea of grieving God has never been a thing that I was able to do completely, because I became so vocal about leaving fundamentalism right off the bat that I immediately got onto Twitter arguments and Facebook arguments with me saying, hey, I've lost God. I'm grieving losing God.
Yeah.
And then people come in and saying, oh, no, he's not gone. You never understood him.
Right.
Nah, he's not gone. You never really understood him. If you kind of just change your beliefs just a little bit, you don't really have to leave him. But I knew in my heart of hearts that my beliefs were different because there was a fundamental change that happened for my mental health and for my ability. That was a switch of not taking supernatural conclusion, not jumping to supernatural conclusions. They became a personal rule of mine that greatly simplified my life. And so for me to just change those beliefs a little bit different, that wasn't going to help me at all, because my beliefs have been fundamentally changed. So understanding though that, okay, so I realize at the age of 28 or whatever that I don't believe in God anymore and I don't think that he's real. That doesn't exqualify, it doesn't change, doesn't automatically realign my emotions. It's not that, I realize he's not real, so I don't feel anything. I realize he's not real, and now I have to fucking grieve this concept. And it was hard because I was having to learn the vocabulary to justify or to fight for my experience at the same time as trying to grieve that experience. And that was unhealthy. That was not a good idea for me to be doing.
One thing I encourage clients to do is to list all the losses that are specifically related to their loss of faith. So for me, there was community. There was I was very involved in music as well, so I didn't have my musical expression anymore. There was childcare available for me.
Mm-hmm.
There was a group of people that had my back. If my, supposedly, if my husband lost his job, they would take care of us. So there was all these things. So it's important. And that can even be helpful for us so we don't just feel like we're going crazy. It's like, no, look, I really did lose all of these things when I lost God. But another assignment that I have clients do is I want them to list as many gains as they can come up with to coincide with the losses, because that's how transition works. There's a loss and there's a gain. So we move from childhood into adolescence. We lose our innocence, but we gain some freedom. And so it's similar, say, if we divorce religion. So I lost one community, but I gained a more open-minded community. You know what I mean? I think that's an important component too, is thinking of it in terms of our gains. What have I gained from leaving that too? Just to help you not to get stuck in such a dark place.
Yeah.
And it's kind of different than a normal grieving a person or something, because that's not always as easy. Like, oh, my mom died, but now I have I have like a stepmom,
right.
Something like that.
Right.
But when it comes with God and something that has so encompassing as our life, there are going to be some huge things that we gain that normally wouldn't be the case.
And this is also why it's important to get involved in a support group of some kind. I think you folks have one on Facebook. I have one on Facebook also called the Divorcing Religion Group. And specifically for people to be able to come in and say, you know what, I am actually really struggling with the holidays are here. And I used to just love, decorating my home or whatever it is. And they can say that in a community of people that will understand. It's important to have people that understand. If your wife died or your husband died, you would go to a support group for bereaved people. So we are bereaved people. We've lost our God. That's a pretty big loss.
Yeah.
That's also why I called it the Divorcing Religion Workshop, because to me, losing your faith is on par with losing your marriage. It's that significant. And I want the world to acknowledge, and the medical and psychological community to acknowledge how significant it is.
Very cool.
God, that's beautiful.
And it's also, it parallels the process of coping with a divorce, right? Which
Absolutely.
is part of the reason you called it that as well. So
you won't sign my papers.
You won't sign my papers. Yeah, about that. So we do need to wrap up, but before we go, just to reiterate, so divorcingreligion.com, you can just search divorcing religion, or you can Google. God damn it! I forgot your last name.
Selbie. Yeah.
Okay.
Selbie.
Okay. You can Google Janice Selbie. Janice, you also have a conference coming up next year. Tell us a little bit about that.
I am very excited.
Yeah,
about
this is pretty exciting. I like the lineup that you have for it.
It's called the Conference on Religious Trauma, and it's happening in 2020. So we're calling it Court 2020.
Cool.
And just some of our speakers, we have Dr. Marlene Winell, Dr. Daryl Ray of Recovering from Religion, Dr. Yanya Lalich. I'm really looking forward. Do you know who Yanya is?
I don't think so.
She's a cult expert, and there's actually just a new Netflix show called Explained, and there's one episode called Cult. Yanya is in that.
I was watching Explained yesterday. They have a great episode on anxiety. I highly recommend that show. I'm a big Vox fan. It's by Vox Media. Anyway,
it's very cool. So Yanya is one of our speakers. Dr. Valerie Tarico, who has some fantastic YouTube videos that I recommend for all of your listeners.
Okay. What's her name again?
Watch Valerie. Valerie Tarico,
Okay.
Tarico.
Cool.
And Janet Heimlich is going to be speaking specifically on childhood indoctrination. But then we have an additional bunch of speakers who are going to be featured. Yasmin Mohammed, she's an activist, a former Muslim. She's going to be coming. Actress Alice Gretchen, Dr. Chrissy Stroop, Nathan Phelps, Jeremiah
Chrissy Stroop's a friend of the show for sure. Sorry,
awesome. I'm so looking forward to.
And did you say
Chrissy
a Phelps in there?
Nathan Phelps.
Nathan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He came from the Westboro family.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Sure did.
Right, of course.
And then this gentleman will be very interesting, Jeremiah Camara, and he is an African-American filmmaker and director, producer in the United States.
Okay.
And he really looks at how the church, the Christian church, has impacted the Black community.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
He's going to be fantastically interesting. And we're still adding the last few speakers. So
cool.
It's pretty exciting.
That is
exciting. Be a big deal.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. I'm going to try to make it if I can. I don't know how. When is it? 2020? When in 2020?
It's April 24th to 26th.
Okay.
And it's in Vancouver, BC. And so it'll be a weekend of both speakers and workshops. So we want to have therapists there. We have many therapists coming from many different groups. Cool. And then we also want people who are recovering from religious trauma and just interested public who want them to come. And we'll have workshops geared for both of those groups. So it's hopefully the first of many. And people can just go to www.court2020.com.
Very cool.
Sounds wonderful. How can we follow you on Twitter?
Oh, please follow me. I have two names on there. One is @divorcereligion.
Okay.
And then the other one is @wise_counselor.
That's with 2 L's, right?
That's with 2 L's. It's the Canadian way.
I was always wondering why I had 2 L's. I'm like, what is up with this?
Wise counselor.
No, I love your stuff on Twitter.
I love the subtle blasphemy there.
And I love that you have 2 different things, because it makes me think that you think you're kind of like Bruce Wayne and Batman.
I actually started the divorce religion one because I was thinking, what would it be like to post as a man and do things like a man do? Like, I don't have my actual picture on the divorce religion one. Mm-hmm. And I try and make my posts on there more like, not aggressive, but more, I speak my mind more.
Right. Beef jerky.
As opposed to my professional one is more like, ladylike and this sort of thing. But my divorce religion one, I'm going to give you why one more.
I love it.
I love that you have 2 different personas for that. That's so fun.
Yeah, you gotta have different headspaces.
I love it.
Janice, thank you so much for being on the show. This was such a good episode.
Pleasure.
I'm
really
very
practical.
excited.
Some
I'm
really
sorry
good,
that I
helpful,
burped at
practical.
you.
Yeah.
Janice, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks, you guys.
As everybody, we have a Patreon. If you want to support our efforts, we have a private online community where you can process your religious grieving.
Like a support group for people who are deconstructing their faith, except
Absolutely.
You don't have to meet inside of the bottom of some like moldy ass concrete block church. You can
with shitty coffee.
With shitty coffee, you can do it online.
With
in
your
own
bathrobe.
I got a new bathrobe, by the way, from Amazon.
Okay.
So nice.
Rate, review, and subscribe on whatever you listen to your podcasts on. Help us out. And as always, thanks for listening.
And remember, if you don't go to church,
Sunday
is just a second Saturday.
I'll unpack that for you a little bit.